talked about work, right? And how we cannot really live without any work. Krishna says that everyone is forced to act according to one's nature. So the option of just renouncing prematurely is actually not recommended by Krishna, because even if we do leave everything and we try to go away, we'll still find an engagement according to our nature. So, and then also in this section, Krishna speaks about how it is far better for a person to take up a work that is according to his nature and do it in an honest and sincere way, rather than being a pretender or a charlatan meditator. And the reason for that is because a person who's actually pretending, and when we say pretending, it means trying to cheat others and trying to project oneself as a greatly self-realized person, he creates a lot of havoc in society. And the faith of so many people actually get disturbed by such a person. And he also does not help himself. So it is better to perform one's duty in an honest way and go through the required process of purification. Because once one has gone through that proper process of purification, then one will naturally come to a place where one will be able to just sit down and think of Krishna, right? Without any distraction. Because if you try to do that prematurely, we also looked at this very famous river in India called Falgu River, where the bed is dry, but then right underneath it, there are strong currents, a lot of water. So a dry renunciation is like that we may artificially say, well, I give up everything, but then internally my senses are still dwelling on the objects of senses. There's a story on that. I mean, while you're doing it, maybe I can quickly, share the story about there were two priests, and they had to cross a river, and there was a lady who also needed help. So one of the priests sort of helped her and sort of helped her cross over. So the other priest, after he had already done that, he kept, throughout the rest of the journey, he kept saying, but then you held her, you carried her. And so this priest said, well, I just carried her for a moment, but you're carrying her in your mind for a much longer time. So the point being that even though we may externally refrain from objects of senses, but our mind will still be dwelling on the objects of senses. So we talked about that. So today what we are going to continue on is, all right, so now we understand that work has to be performed, but then the million-dollar question is, what kind of work? And so Krishna is going to spend the next section talking about yajna, which is at the heart of this karma yoga, right?
How to purify our work while we are working in a detached way. So this is we'll start from, let me share. Text 9. This is an important verse, I will recite it. Yagyadhartha karmanonyatra lokoyam karma bandhana tadartham karma kaunteya mukta sangha samachara. Work done as a sacrifice for Vishnu has to be performed. Otherwise, work causes bondage in this material world. Therefore, O son of Kunti, perform your prescribed duties for his satisfaction, and in that way, you will always remain free from bondage. So this is like the ending of Krishna's instruction on how to work in such a way that you're working, but you're also detached. You're working in knowledge, but you're detached. And then that provides relief from being entangled in this world. But higher than that is when the work has a purpose, and when the work is done for the satisfaction of Krishna. And that is the highest, which is what Krishna is revealing to Arjuna here. So then, text 10.
In the beginning of creation, the Lord of all creatures sent forth generations of men and demigods, along with sacrifices for Vishnu, and blessed them by saying, be thou happy by this yajna, sacrifice, because its performance will bestow upon you everything desirable for living happily and achieving liberation.
So Arjuna may ask, after hearing the previous verse, that, well, what if I'm not at that position where I can do the work for your satisfaction? So starting from text 10 onwards, in the next few verses, Krishna is going to describe the path for somebody who's just starting out. and who doesn't really have that ability or inclination to offer his work to the Supreme. So Krishna is prescribing the first stage of the Vedas, where one offers some sacrifices to the higher beings like the demigods, or to get the necessities of life. So that's
And
the
it's
beginning.
interesting how, even all over the world, there are so many traditional cultures where this practice is actually performed, where people take their first harvest and offer it to the sun, or to some aspect of nature, right? So Krishna is saying that, all right, if you cannot perform this highest sacrifice of bhakti, then offer it. And so we'll talk more about that in our presentation.
Text 11. The demigods, being pleased by sacrifices, will also please you, and thus by cooperation between men and demigods, prosperity will reign for all. So demigods are basically agents for the natural resources, universal administrators, like for the sun and the light and rain and so forth.
And so this kind of brings in the aspect of harmony, working in harmony, that we are not just little islands, but there is a correlation between so many different aspects of our life, and how to work in harmony with all of them.
That nature is not just nature without any management. There is management involved. There are other higher beings who are providing the necessities of life.
In charge of the various necessities of life, the demigods, being satisfied by the performance of yajna, sacrifice, will supply all necessities to you. But he who enjoys such gifts without offering them to the demigods in return is certainly a thief. So again, it's the idea that whatever we are receiving is something that we as soon as we are born, we just take it for granted. It's kind of like going into, there's a story of this person, right, who goes into this house where everything is laid out for him.
Yeah, he goes into a forest and he's very hungry, and then he's trying to find somebody who can help me, and then he stumbles across this beautiful palatial house, and well lighted. So he walks into it, and then he sees like a dining table filled with food, delicious food. So then he just say, okay, this is for me.
Yeah.
And he starts eating it up, and then
without really thinking, like, who put it there, and what is my relationship. So it's the same thing. We come into this world, and we'll talk more about this in one of our presentation slides. So the devotees of the Lord are released from all kinds of sins because they eat food which is offered first for sacrifice. Others who prepare food for personal sense enjoyment verily eat only sin.
So it kind of again connects that relationship between our food and our attitude towards the food. And there is a law of karma involved with the food as well. And this is, Krishna is saying that one has to be aware of that.
This whole section could also be actually called the yoga of eating, or the yoga of food. And we'll talk more in greater detail about this, and how, sometimes we may think we are vegetarians, so maybe there's no karma, but there is karma involved at every level of our eating. So how we can, live on a platform of no karma. And even
all
beyond.
living bodies subsist on food grains which are produced from rains. So Krishna is just kind of giving very basic introduction to connecting the dots, basically, where our food comes from. And then rains are produced by performance of yajna, sacrifice, and yajna is born of prescribed duties, which are basically duties given in the Vedas, how a person should live their life, and then what they should do in return for the facilities they're receiving, prescribed duties, karma.
Regulated activities are prescribed in the Vedas, and the Vedas are directly manifested from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Consequently, the all-pervading transcendence is eternally situated in acts of sacrifice. So again, the importance of, living a life of sacrifice, right? And what that means is living a life that is not just meant for my own gratification, but living a life of gratitude. Sacrifice is essentially gratitude in action. And so when we live a life expressing gratitude for what we are receiving, then we can actually receive it. We can become greater recipients, and also it'll make us happier. And in turn, we'll be able to reciprocate and make the world a happier place.
So in these two verses, Krishna is basically making the connection between our food and himself, the Supreme. Cause and effect. My dear Arjuna, one who does not follow in human life the cycle of sacrifice thus established by the Vedas certainly leads a life full of sin, living only for the satisfaction of the senses. Such a person lives in vain. So kind of this, he concludes that if one follows the Vedas, then they can actually make advancement. Otherwise, the person kind of spins the wheels, spins the tires.
And that is actually a really important connection to make, right? That because we're constantly eating food. And so where is it coming from? And how is that connected to my cultivation of spiritual consciousness? So we'll get into our presentation. I think I just wanted to see the... Okay, so we'll address all this as we go along. So let's first get into the presentation. We'll leave some time for... So like we described this chapter 3, this is the second part, verses 9 through 16. And it's about being grateful. And like we said, sacrifice is, gratitude in action. So continue.
So like this is the first thing Krishna mentions in the 9th verse, that one should work as an offering or sacrifice to Vishnu or Krishna. So therein he gives this formula for transforming our work into worship, because previously, yesterday, we left it as that one should work and purify one's works. The question is, how do we purify our work? And this is kind of like a short sketch of how we can do it. It starts with the intention, how our intention, before we do anything, our intention counts. And intention decides where we're going to go. So having that intention that why am I working? That my work, I'm getting my energy from the Supreme, and my work is meant to also serve the Supreme in some way. So that is the intention. And righteous is basically acting according to, not according to our whimsical mind, but acting according to the directions of the Vedas, the directions of higher personalities, saintly personalities. So that way we are on the right course of life, and we don't make...
because every work that we do has karma. So we want to have work that kind of aligns itself with our deeper spiritual purpose. And then of course comes the, the big thing, the results, the fruits. And what do you do with the fruits? So again, utilizing those fruits for, the satisfaction of the Supreme, and in turn, the satisfaction of the entire universe. So it is described that when you water the root of the tree, then all the leaves are automatically nourished. So in the same way, when you offer the result for the satisfaction of the Supreme, because this entire universe is actually part of that same Supreme Absolute Truth, then everybody is nourished. And we'll tell a story on this a little bit later.
And remembrance is important, because while we are doing the work, if we are able to remember the Supreme, and while we are doing it, then really enhances the quality of that work we are doing, and it really keeps us on track.
And then whatever remaining time, so we talked about this, and this is an extremely important principle of our bhakti, which is that, when we do our work, there's still some work that remains, right, after our work.
Some time remains.
Some time remains, right? So that time is utilized for rededicating and working on our consciousness. So it's interesting that Stephen Covey, he talks about these 4 things. He says that in order to actually, do work in a successful way, he talks about that there are 4 areas in our life where we should spend time sharpening the saw. Because if you sharpen the saw, then when you actually go into your work, you will actually be empowered. And he says that the 4 areas in which we should sharpen our saw is physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. And then in spiritual, he says that we should spend some time, for meditation, for fasting, for reading, wisdom texts, scriptures, and just, contemplation. So that time that we take out, it may seem like it's time taken away from my daily routine, but it's time that is our investment in ourselves. And when we invest in ourselves, then we have the ability to actually give to others.
Our family, our work, and everybody else. So remaining time also means that we should always plan our work in such a way that there is time remaining for our spiritual rejuvenation also. Otherwise, just work is not going to lead us anywhere.
Because the word recreate essentially means to recreate ourselves, right? So we want recreation that can help us rejuvenate and recreate ourselves.
And ultimately for the pleasure of the Supreme. So having that formula, and we'll talk more about these principles in chapter 5 when we talk about akarma.
So, why do we need sacrifice, right?
Yeah.
Because, it's kind of, when we are born in this world, we are born with a certain amount of self-centeredness. It's just intrinsic, right? The ego comes in and I feel like I'm the master of all I survey. And this whole world is meant for my enjoyment. And so sacrifice basically turns that around and makes us view everything that's around us not as ingredients for our enjoyment, but rather ingredients for making an offering.
And it also changes the purpose of our life, that my purpose of my life is not to just enjoy, but to engage in higher like spiritual realization. And then for that, I need sacrifice. So it's not just about consuming.
I like this point about giving up the sense of self-proprietorship.
Yeah.
Because without sacrifice, the sense is that it's all mine.
Yeah.
Right? And it's meant for me. But when we start sacrificing, we see that it's meant for giving it back.
And it also creates that sense of service in us.
And mothers do that all the time.
Yeah.
Right? When the little child, they say, please share. Right? So that it's the idea of sacrifice, that a child naturally doesn't want to share the 2 lollipops that he just got. But the mother will say, no, it's a good idea, please share. Right? So it's that sense of going past our own false ego.
And Krishna makes this direct connection that to the extent one engages in sacrifice, to that extent he can perceive transcendence. So this is like a little diagram. Forgive those glaring blue colors. I could not find a better picture. But anyways, this shows this whole, those 2 verses. Krishna is just making this connection between the food, that all living entities subsist on food, and food is only possible by rains. Rains come from sacrifices, and we'll show a study that actually shows that. And the sacrifices actually come from following prescribed duties given in the wisdom text. And the wisdom text actually ultimately they come from the Supreme. So it shows this cycle of life that we actually are dependent on the Supreme in all situations of our life. And therefore one should engage in sacrifice.
So this was a very interesting research that we never really expected to find. And this is a research done by the scientist Venkata Chaganti, and he, this is a study that he published in the International Journal of Innovative Science, Engineering and Technology, volume 7 in the February of 2020. And he collected data for rainfall for a period of 39 years.
Around Georgia. And he conducted yajnas or fire sacrifices, Agnihotra sacrifices. And based on his data, he concluded that the years in which he conducted the sacrifice, the rainfall was better, the quality of the water was better, there was less pollution in the water.
Also in the air.
In the air as well, and versus the years when there was no yajna. So you guys can Google this out and look at the paper where he shows his findings. But it's interesting to see that.
So now here is the thing, that we have to work, but then our work, what do you do? What is the ultimate fruit of our work? The ultimate fruit of our work is food. That's what we bring on the table. We work so that we can bring food on the table. And so this whole section is liberation through tongue. So we already talked about liberation through sound. So this section is liberation through tongue. And Prabhupada says that the tongue is actually most voracious and the most difficult sense to control. And so when we control the sense, then automatically all the other senses are automatically purified.
And the tongue has 2 purposes. One is to taste good food, and the other is to talk or speak. So both those qualities of the tongue, in spiritual life, there is a starting principle is to first take care of the tongue.
So we are what we eat. This is something that George Bernard Shaw, he said. And in Ayurveda, we also add another layer to that, which is we are what we eat. We are also how we eat. So now we're going to talk about both those principles. And this little snippet that we are going to show you will show you the connection between our food and our emotions or our brain, and how the 2 are actually interconnected.
Suffer from the wrong kind of nutrition?
We know that junk food is making us fat, but science is telling us now that it might also be shrinking our brains.
Brain researchers have joined the dining table to study the effects of our eating habits.
Diets that are high in fat and sugar in the long term lead to changes in part of the brain involved in memory.
This is a recent field of research, a developing science that spotlights a new facet of nutrition.
habitual intake of foods high in fat and sugar results in a reprogramming of the brain.
In short, our brain is affected by what's on our plates.
So it's interesting to see, right, how that ice cream, and I'm never going to eat ice cream in the same way ever again, that it directly affects our emotions. And Ayurveda talks about this a lot, that the food that we eat, and I remember when I went for my Ayurveda training, one of the things that even before we talked about herbs and different stuff, the first thing we were taught was to teach people how to eat very slowly and very mindfully, and to chew our food. And they said that, you know, without this, even if a patient comes to you, don't even worry about giving them herbs, because none of it is going to help if one doesn't learn how to eat.
How many times you have to chew? Like 32 times.
Yeah, something on those lines. And so the idea being that, you know, we have to learn how to eat. And so this is the section where Krishna is connecting us and helping us to go just past even mindful eating into in a place where we can eat with gratitude and love. So this has been sort of like the sad state of our eating habit in modern times. Our eating has been secularized. It has been robbed of its poetry and beaten into the staccato uniformity of packaged snacks. We have insisted upon efficiency as the only criteria of our culinary aesthetic. We are in desperate need of reconnecting our eating with the sacred. And this is by Kent Hayden. He's a graduate from Divinity School, right? A graduate of Princeton Theological Seminary. So we see that, you know, most of the kids, most of the adults, for them, food is simply just, you know, picking up something and just tossing it in tossing it in the microwave. And in traditional societies, eating was not just a way of filling the stomach, but it was a way of connecting.
It was a way of offering gratitude, offering love. People would offer their gratitude to the universe, to the Supreme.
And also as a family.
As a family.
You'd sit together, one would eat, and one would connect. And in fact, the whole idea of breaking food, right? Companion means someone that you break food with. And so there's just so much tradition and culture, and in modern times that has been tossed out. Sometimes people just talk about just wanting food in a pill, right?
Yeah, or taking an energy bar, and that takes care of your lunch.
Yeah. So it's been kind of stripped off. So we'll just watch this little thing, which will maybe. It's a little sad, but let's see.
We are disconnected from the source of our food.
Brought by America's finest carpet.
In tonight's Fact or Fiction, we're talking chocolate milk and people's lack of knowledge about it. A story going around today claims that in a new poll, 7% of Americans believe that chocolate milk comes from brown cows. Sadly, this is true. The Innovation Center for U.S. Dairy surveyed 1,000 adults. Here's the results. 48% didn't know how chocolate milk is made, and yes, there is that 7% thinking that it comes from brown cows. Perhaps those people were remembering this commercial from the 80s, playfully showed chocolate milk coming from a chocolate cow. For the record, chocolate milk comes from all colors of cows with cocoa and sugar added.
Tonight.
So this is the disconnect between our food and its source. And then even not just the cows, but where do the cows or anything else gets its sustenance from, and so on and so forth.
So tracing sort of that line, right?
Yeah.
That from the cows, and then the cows beyond, the cows getting, you know, eating grass, and then we can go on, and that way we learn how to appreciate. So this is like a meditation, you know, where we can, you know, what does it really take for food to come on our table?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things. I mean, it starts with the soil, and there's so much outcry right now about the seeds and the soil, right? What kind of seeds we are cultivating? It needs the seeds, the nutrient-rich soil. It needs all the insects and the little bugs and the bacteria and the microbes that are making it all happen. The clean water supply that provides hydration to the roots.
We're talking about the bees.
Yeah.
How the bees are actually becoming, reducing in number, and how that can affect our food supply. So
the farmers, the workers, the animals, the truck driver, the grocery store, and person. So there's a whole chain that once we start looking into it, we'll see that we are actually dependent on all these people. And especially during the pandemic, we have been exposed to the weak links, and any of these links that have been breaking down we are feeling the pinch. That sometimes you don't get a certain type of food, and so on and so forth. Like right now in our stores here, it's hard to find mangoes. Usually in the summer, it's so easy to find mangoes.
It's very hard, yeah. And this is again another very interesting thing, that we breathe air all the time. And I think we were just hearing a story about this guy who was, when he had to get on a ventilator, and then he found out that how much money it would cost for him to get on a ventilator per hour. And then he was overcome by emotion, thinking that he never thought of air, right, as something that could cost money. And so...
so we did some digging and we found that, I mean, we inhale about 550 liters of oxygen, net oxygen. So we inhale and we also exhale some of the oxygen. So this is a net oxygen that we inhale. And if you have to buy oxygen, suppose all the oxygen was sucked out of the air, and if you have to live on tanks, oxygen cylinders, so that's roughly $30 a liter. And based on this calculation, it's like $17,000 of oxygen per day. Okay, so that's a pretty heavy bill. And similarly for the sunlight, this is roughly, say, amount of sunlight that comes into 5,000 square feet of space, assuming a sunny day. And so based on how much electricity costs per unit, like 10 or 12 cents a unit, and how much electricity can be produced from that sunlight that is hitting 5,000 square feet, the calculation comes to around $12,000 per day. That's our sunlight bill.
So all of this, we are receiving it completely, freely, and we don't take a moment to stop and pause. And so Krishna is speaking in this section that, because there are so many, I was just also reflecting that the plant is actually sacrificing its life. There are insects that are sacrificing their life to bring food on even vegetarian food on our table, right? There is the blood and the sweat of the farmer, and then
the cows and the oxen.
The cows, and there's just so many entities who have made sacrifices so that the food can come to us. And so when we offer that food back in an act of sacrifice, because the animals cannot, but when we do it on their behalf, then they all get the benefit of that sacrifice. So.
And it is said in one of the wisdom texts that we have debt from so many living entities, and we ignore it, but the debt is there, and any debt that is unpaid, we have to pay it even more because it keeps on increasing.
So so this is actually quite an amazing thing, that how this idea of living in close connection with nature, and then offering gratitude and seeing the interconnectivity, and cooking in a certain consciousness. That is the sort of the thrust of this section here, is that it's not just what we eat, because we can look at the calorie count and the list of ingredients and be very mindful, but there is also the aspect of consciousness that comes in the picture. And so here is this nun. She's a Buddhist monk. Her name is Hyon Kwon, and she actually was discovered by some of the top chefs in New York, in Manhattan. And when they found her cooking, they were so struck by it that they actually flew all the way to Korea to see how she cooks, because they had never tasted anything like this before. And she talks about bringing consciousness. So we'll watch a little bit about her. So, this is actually very central to our practice of bhakti, is, what kind of consciousness am I cooking in? Am I just, rushing into the kitchen, putting things together and just rushing out? Or am I first entering into a state of meditation? So cooking then in that case becomes a form of meditation. And not just cooking, but even all the way from shopping. Every aspect of that work that we do is an act of mindful meditation and conscious gratitude. And in that way, when we finally receive that food, it's called, and we'll talk more about that, it's actually literally in Sanskrit, it's called prasad. And prasad means mercy.
And therefore, this is yoga of food, where we achieve a union with the Supreme through food. So this talks about, this is a study done that shows the impact of rituals on food, because now as with the secularization of food, we are getting far away from all the rituals. But it shows that how, when in an experiment, when they performed some rituals, then the food tasted better to people who participated in the study, and they were willing to pay more for that kind of food. So we'll watch.
This is actually quite an interesting. This is, I think, Princeton, and I think the other one is from Harvard.
Harvard.
You know, they've kind of come together and they're trying to understand.
Mm.
You know, does it really make a difference when we make a ritual around food?
I'm Shankar Vedantam, and I am a science correspondent at National Public Radio. Welcome to this NPR group. I did a story about it for NPR this morning.
Or if you perform the ritual prior to consuming a product. So in one of the studies, we asked the participants who came to the lab to taste the chocolate bar, and half of them engaged in a ritual. We told them to perform a series of steps, and basically we asked them to unwrap the chocolate, then taste half of the chocolate bar, then unwrap the other side of the chocolate, and then eat it. And what we were looking at is how much time they spent savoring the chocolate, how much they reported enjoying the experience of eating the chocolate, and also how much willing they were to pay for the chocolate. And interestingly, what we found is that people who engage in the ritual prior to eating the chocolate reported enjoying the experience more compared to the people who did not do the rituals. They also savored the chocolate for longer, and they were also willing to pay more for the same chocolate.
So compared to people who just jumped in and ate the chocolate the way that I usually eat my candy, which is with both hands and spreading it all over my face, the people who ate it a little slowly, who broke the bar in half without unwrapping it and then unwrapped half and ate it.
So the whole idea, again, just to show that, there are, rituals and traditional societies, and especially the process of bhakti, sometimes, our entire bhakti process is called the kitchen religion, which means that it's all, it all starts with the tongue, and the center is really the kitchen, where we cook for Krishna. And we'll talk, I think there was some request that if we can talk about how to offer food. So we'll talk about that at the end. So
this is another interesting tidbit that how this consciousness, the marriage of consciousness and food is also now coming into the commercial domain. This is a very intentional chocolate founded in 2007. He infused his chocolate by a special recording device which had recorded the electromagnetic brain waves of meditating Tibetan monks. And then he exposes his confections to that recording for 5 days per batch. And this scientist, he conducted a test in which he says that the subjects who ate intentional chocolate improved their mood 67% compared to people who ate regular chocolate. So again,
and I think when we did that whole section on the yoga of sound, I was just thinking that we can see, right, that consciousness, whatever consciousness or sound that we have, it does change the water, right? We saw how it kind of started taking on different shapes. So most of our food is water, right? And so when we put intention in it, then naturally it changes, right? And so the impact it has on our consciousness, on our mood, on our body is something that is very subtle, but at the same time it's being studied and there is something to it. So this is food infused with Krishna's love. And so prasadam, like we said, is food that has been offered to Krishna with love. And so, like we say, right, the way to a person's heart is through the stomach. Or we also say that, there is nothing like the taste of a home-cooked, meal by a loving mother, right? So we all have a sense that when food is cooked with love, then it acquires a different nature. And what to speak of food that has been cooked with devotion for the Supreme Lord and cooked for his pleasure. So in that whole act of cooking, I am not in the picture. It's not being cooked for me. So I cook in that mood, and when I make an offering, then that food becomes prasadam, which actually heals not just the body, but also heals the mind and the heart.
And literally in the Hare Krishna movement or in other places also, you'll find that a lot of people, they come to appreciate spiritual life through the medium of prasadam. So they had no idea about spirituality or no interest in it, but this spiritual food has some impact in our consciousness for both of us.
For both of us, we can testify for that. We were newly married and just very new here, and we decided, we just got an invitation to go to the temple, and we did.
And I was an atheist. I had no interest in God.
And and I was newly married, and I had some sort of pride on my ability to cook. And so I was cooking all kinds of exotic stuff. And then when we went there, there was nobody there for some reason at that temple that day, and there was a whole feast laid out on a table with no one to eat. And they said, and we're like, wow, this is an amazing place. And when we ate that, I was really humbled, because I thought, what did you guys, I asked one of the devotees, I said, what did you put in this, It just tastes so different from all those exotic recipes that I've
The
tried.
best restaurants we've been to.
And she said, well, it's offered to Krishna. And
so we started going there every weekend. Okay, this is a good place to grab some good food. And lo and behold, that.
So this is Steve Jobs, and he actually, is very, was very grateful, because
when he was in Oregon, going to what was the name of the college? Reed's College.
And he didn't have much money, and he was struggling, and so he says that how he used to go to the temple every Sunday to get.
That was his best meal of the week. Actually, he used to walk 7 miles to go to the temple.
It wasn't all romantic. I didn't have a dorm room, so I slept on the floor in friends' rooms. I returned Coke bottles for the 5-cent deposits to buy food with. And I would walk the 7 miles across town every Sunday night to get one good meal a week at the Hare Krišna temple. I loved it. And much of what I stumbled into by following my curiosity and intuition turned out to be priceless later on.
So, there are so many stories like that. We're just watching, there's a show where there's a rich kid who, he takes on this experiment, like the son of a millionaire, like lots and lots of money. And he takes on this experiment of just wanting to go homeless for 3 days. And so he does that, and it's really hard for him. It's in London, and he doesn't have food. And then he meets this other homeless guy. And he says the only reason why he survives is because he gets these, free prasadam, and so this guy also then goes ahead and gets a plate of prasadam, and, so prasadam is something that is, that was at the heart of the starting of this movement. This bhakti revolution in the Western world actually started with the distribution of this prasadam, because when Prabhupada came to the Bowery, he would actually cook a whole feast for all the,
all the hippies that used to come to him, and not only cook it, but he would also clean up after they left, because they didn't know that they should help him clean up.
So it's not happiness that makes us grateful, but gratefulness that makes us happy. So again, this act of cooking and serving, offering to Krishna is, gratitude in action. And, we can, and why, when we're performing this act of gratitude, we're actually helping and also bestowing great auspiciousness for everyone around us,
Because that prasadam is considered non-different from Krishna. And therefore it has that spiritual impact on anybody who comes in touch with it.
So this is actually a restaurant in New York, which is now considered to be one of the best vegan restaurants in New York State. And I think even over America, I think it is being recognized more and more. And this is a devotee who runs this Ayurvedic restaurant called Divya's Kitchen. And she actually has combined the principles of Ayurveda with the principles of Bhakti. So we'll just show you just a tiny little part of it. And then if you ever go to New York,
if you feel tired after you eat, it means that maybe you ate too much, or maybe the food was too heavy for you to digest. How you feel, but I always recommend that you actually connect with how you feel.
Her cookbook on Ayurveda is actually one of the best-selling cookbooks now.
What the dish will do for you, like how it will make you feel. So my passion is to apply the Ayurvedic principles to any kind of cuisine. That's why you see on our menu we have risotto, we have lasagna, we have the Asian stir fry. So rather than just going for the most popular dish, experience how food can balance you and go for the things that you feel will be the most balancing for you. My favorite part is at the end of cooking, I bless the food. Whatever I do, I want to benefit people. So I'm very grateful to be alive, and I pray to be of service to others for the benefit of others. Honestly, the biggest compliment I would hear when I go and see guests in the dining room would be that I can really feel the love in your food, and I'm like, yes.
So there are, so many prasadam businesses now. There is this very famous donut shop in New York, which is
Donut plant.
One of the best donut. I mean, he also offers his donuts. He has an altar there in his kitchen. So more and more people, and this way we can actually change the collective consciousness of people in the world.
And Prabhupada's dream was that he wanted to actually make restaurants with reading rooms, because he realized that food is such a powerful means of connecting with people. So having that space where people can come and eat and discuss and read some books, that was his. And Govinda's, which is a world famous Hare Krishna restaurant chain, you can find that. We went to Australia. It's like really mind-blowing food all over the Gold Coast, anywhere you go.
So I guess like we talked about yajna, right? So yajna means sacrifice, and the current sacrifice in this age is the chanting. So when we cook food in that consciousness by performing this yajna of chanting, then we actually benefit everyone. So there is a story of Krishna, and one of his very dear. Actually, we're reading Arjuna, right? Arjuna, who's asking the questions, his wife, and so one time they were exiled from their kingdom and they were living in the forest in a very simple way. And Draupadi had this magic pot, which had this special benediction that as long as like she hadn't eaten her meal, she could feed like as many people out of that bowl. It was called Akshay Patra. She could just feed literally thousands of people, unlimited number of people.
And once the sage, a very kind of a temperamental sage called Durvasa, he came with 60,000 of his disciples to their hermitage, and he said, "We are hungry and we want food." So they said, "We are going to the Ganges to take a bath, and we'll come back and then have the food." So here, the Pandavas, they freaked out that how are they going to now? So they quickly went to Draupadi, and she said, "I just finished my eating, so I can't produce any more food now." So they were really.
So she was like completely distraught, right?
And they started praying to Krishna.
So then she started like really remembering Krishna in earnestness, and then suddenly Krishna appeared. And so Krishna says, "Oh, Draupadi, I'm so hungry. Can you give me something to eat?" And Draupadi was thinking, "Oh, like he's just mocking me. He knows I don't have anything." So she said, "I have nothing. I just ate." And he says, No. Go and check in your pot. Maybe there is something there." And so she goes and she looks into her pot, and there is this one tiny little grain of rice that is in that pot. And so she says, "Well, Krishna, this is all I have. And, please eat, accept this. And also, please, let you be satisfied and let the whole universe be satisfied." And so Krishna takes that and he eats it and he's completely satisfied. So when he is satisfied, the sages who had gone to take a bath in the river, suddenly they feel like they just had like a, 50-course meal, and they're completely like up to here, and they talk to each other like, "It's embarrassing. We can't go back to Draupadi because we don't have any room in our stomach, any appetite." So then they go off. And so the point being that by satisfying Krishna, everybody is also satisfied. And actually it's interesting, the word in Sanskrit, in Bengali for prasadam is barhailo. Barhailo means increasing. So when we offer, then actually the food in a mystical way increases, which means that it increases in its capacity to nourish. It also increases in its capacity to satisfy everyone else.
And there's a famous temple in India, Jagannath Temple. You might have heard of it. And then they cook humongous amount of food there to be distributed to the pilgrims. But the mystery there is they cook a certain amount of food every day, and nobody can predict the number of pilgrims who are going to come. But never they overcook or they undercook. The prasadam that they cook is always sufficient for the number of pilgrims that come that particular day. And that's the mystery. How does this happen?
So that's our little presentation today on prasadam, the yoga of eating, yajna. Thank you, Joy. Oh, you know the story. So we'll take your questions and your reflections. And I think somebody was saying that they want to see how we offer. Maybe that's something we can do on a Friday.
Yeah.
We can actually show you. We can do our video thing, and you can see it while we practically do it. Yeah. So let's go up, I think.
I'm at the top.
I appreciate today's reflection that Krishna loves us even if we fail. We're just happy for a nightly drink. What does that mean according to our nature? How do we know that work is of our nature?
I know, Uncle, I got your question, so I didn't get the time to respond. Yeah, we all have a certain nature. Like somebody has the business mind, and somebody has the teaching mind, and somebody has the administrative mind, or so on and so forth, the creative mind. So I guess we work according to our nature. In Kali Yuga, it's really kind of even harder now because so many, I mean, the whole society is not geared towards allowing people to work according to their nature. In earlier times, the kings, they used to make sure that everybody was engaged according to their nature. But in today's day and age, it's hard to find that. I guess your second part of the question was how do we maintain the livelihood? So you do the best you can, and the main thing now is to basically at the same time cultivate our spiritual nature, which is the most important thing to cultivate.
Actually, there are two things there. There is passion and there is purpose, right? Passion is working according to our nature, which more and more in this age of Kali Yuga, it's an age where everything is topsy-turvy. We may not be able to work exactly according to our nature. We do the best we can. But so the better thing is to align or find a deeper spiritual purpose in our work that we do. And that way it gets purified. So Sindhu and Raghu, earlier Krishna doesn't speak highly of Vedas. The Yajna mantras are from Vedas. How do we reconcile this? What is the R of today's discussion?
Yeah, Krishna doesn't speak highly of the Vedas because even in this section, when he talks about the Vedas and the Yajna mantras, they are for the lower rung. So in this section, that also addresses the R for today's discussion are the rungs of the Vedas, the rungs of the yoga ladder. So Krishna starts with the basic that, okay, somebody wants, they should start out with offering the sacrifices mentioned in the Vedas, at least to become grateful. And that will start their spiritual evolution, which will ultimately end in doing everything for the Supreme. Because the Vedic yajnas are there mainly meant for satisfying the administrative demigods to get some results of fruits. And then Krishna or Vishnu is worshipped indirectly in those mantras. So, and the Vedas are the big chunk of the Vedas is filled with these ritualistic, fruitive yajnas that.
Actually, Krishna himself rejects it. Later, when the residents of Vrindavan, they want to make an offering to Indra. So then Krishna comes in and says, there's no need, just worship me, So, but at the same time, like we mentioned earlier, there is the Vedas actually bring everyone within its fold. So there are people who may not be ready to offer everything to the Supreme Lord. So for them, there is this one level where they can see the connectivity, right, of what they're receiving and then make an offering of, gratitude.
So the word Vedas is also kind of a broad term. It is specific and also it's very general. So in its specificity, it refers to the four Vedas, Yajna, Atharva, and Rig Vedas. And in its generality, it means all the Vedic literature. So including the Puranas and the Mahabharata and Srimad Bhagavatam and the Upanishads, and everything is considered Vedas also.
So when Krishna is rejecting the Vedas, it means a certain section of the Vedas, which just basically promotes ritualistic worship. Sacrifice is gratitude in action. Love that. Thank you, Delia. I imagine eating must be one of the most overlooked areas of spirituality because eating is not a bad thing. I will admit I've been putting more effort into not eating something when I'm not hungry just because it tastes good. Yeah, it's actually, there are two aspects of, and we talked earlier a little bit about that, how it starts with the tongue. So the tongue has two functions. One is speaking or vibrating, and the other is tasting. So when we purify both, one is by chanting, and then the other is by tasting prasadam. So by those two things, one can actually purify one's existence. Remaining time also refers to work-life balance. Yes, absolutely.
Work-life balance and life means family life, spiritual life. Is sacrifice and renunciation used interchangeably? Sacrifice in context of yajna could be fire offering using Veda mantras. Yes, sacrifice, renunciation is renouncing our duties or renunciation of the fruits of work, and sacrifice is more like conscious act of offering the fruits of our work. So renunciation and sacrifice in that sense, they are different, but they go hand in hand together because one need to have a sense of renunciation to offer sacrifice.
Yeah, and we are offering, and in a sense, we are giving up the fruits of our work, right? So in that sense, they could be, but sacrifice, renunciation is more sort of like the negative aspect, right? That I'm giving up. Sacrifice is a positive aspect, is a positive offering of love. So, right? So the two are in, they're not exactly the same, but one can lead to the other if the understanding is right. So in our times, our Vedic mantras that we chant is really, it's been made very easy for us in this age of Kali, knowing that, most of us are not adept, so it's just by chanting the same Maha Mantra that we are practicing right now, we can make an offering. We'll share with that. Did I agree with you completely? Thank you for ruining ice cream.
It's never going to be ruined. Ice cream is always will be there.
I would be a terrible student.
No kind of study will ruin it.
I eat way fast. Yeah, me too, Joe. And it's something that once I learned Ayurveda, I really had to, kind of remind myself. At the end, can you show us how we may pray? Yes, we'll do that on Friday. It's no longer enough to eat food grown organically. What is necessary is regenerative farming to preserve and support all layers. Yes. It's even in the name of green and organic, right? Yeah. I have a friend who's going to teach me how to perform prasad. Could rituals increase the vibration of water inherent in the food, thereby aligning the vibration of food with vibration of the ritual?
Yeah, I mean, whatever ritual we perform with that consciousness, that's what the food is going to imbibe.
Yeah, and so, it's very subtle, but, whatever we do will actually affect, because we are bringing our consciousness into it. And if our consciousness is infused with love and gratitude, then that food in turn is going to nourish us and increase our experience of gratitude. So it's sort of like, it's going to have a feedback loop, right? And so our gratitude will continue to increase. Delia, I love your question. How does feeding the hungry impact our spiritual life? Excellent question. We're going to come back to this question in the end. That's a good question. I love this. I've been making my dinner and putting it on my altar before we chant, and I eat after class. If you offer our food to Krishna before we eat, I'd be less inclined to give Krishna junk food. Okay, let's address this.
There are 3 more questions.
Okay, let's just see if they're connected. I like the story from the Mahabharata. What does the Gita say about alcohol? Yeah, well, the devotees and the Bhagavad-Gita specifically talks about the body as being a temple, a sacred place, and the act of eating as being a sacred act. And so we try to avoid anything that can unnecessarily, as it is, this material existence is a place of intoxication.
And forgetfulness, and then alcohol, things like intoxicants like alcohol or other intoxicants, they take away our focus, they take away our remembrance of who we truly are, and they make us do crazy things. And it's kind of a deterrent in our spiritual life, big deterrent.
At the same time, if one is, this is actually one of the beauty of this process of bhakti, that if one is habituated in some way, then, the bhakti process simply says that let's just go on with your practices, and in due course of time, these are very small things and they kind of fall off anyways. It's something that both of us can attest to, that I had my habits, he had his, and for us it was like a test experiment, that as we continue to chant, then we didn't even realize when these things just sort of were not tasteful. Like we talked about the higher taste, it kind of just fell off, so I would not worry.
It's not a disqualification or anything. It's one of the things that will go away.
I like the story from the Mahabharata when the Pandavas were exiled. Do you have any resources for learning to cook healthier food?
Lots of them.
Lots and lots of them, Delia. So Joe already shared. I think Divya Alter's book is actually a really good book. So you may want to order that on Amazon if you like. I had a fantastic vegan sherbet the other day. We also make vegan donuts, by the way. So one of these days, you guys can try that. May I make a reflection on Mike? Yes. I remember one proverb in Hindi, Jo tez namak khata hai, uska jeevan bhi tez hota hai. And I can connect it to, yes. So she's saying that when you eat sharp, food which is too hot and spicy, then. So yes, Delia, you can, I guess we also have to address your question about feeding the poor.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Okay, I'll start with my reflection. When my sisters and I were young, my dad took us one day to have ice cream. And my sister was eating her ice cream on the cone, and my dad wanted a taste. And so he leaned over to try to get a taste, and my sister goes, "Ugh." And my dad actually got really upset and kind of angry, and he said, "You wouldn't even have the ice cream if it were for me, if it weren't for me." And so then my sister felt bad, and she was like, "Okay, here, you know, have a taste." But then I was thinking, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think probably Krishna isn't going to ask us for a taste of our ice cream. He's just kind of there waiting patiently for, you know, for the moment to arrive, if we can kind of get out of our own selfish enjoyment of whatever it is, to realize and like offer up, like of our own free will, here, have a taste.
So beautiful. Yes.
Yeah, and actually Krishna is the only thing he's interested in is our love. So he says later on in the Bhagavad-Gita that if you offer me with love a little bit of water or fruit or a flower or even a leaf, I will accept it. So he's not interested in our food. I mean,
because the food is matter,
Yeah.
right? So it's our love, just like you're rightly pointing out, that when a kid is young, you know, it's all about, you know, can I get more? You know, it's all about, you know, me. So hopefully when a kid matures, then they'll have some gratitude, and they'll say, all right, you know, this is for you. So the real thing is the offering of the heart. And there is no greater act of love than cooking for someone that you love, right? And so it's a very intimate, and as well, it's a very, you know, it's a very heartfelt activity. So when we engage that activity in making a wonderful thing for Krishna, then it immediately binds us together in a deep relationship. So, and also, I guess your point about feeding the poor, it's not really, you know, there is some merit. And then I think when we talk about karma, we can discuss this more, that when you feed hungry people, then there is some good karma that comes out of it. But our process is not about collecting good karma, because good karma, as you know, is also binding. So when you offer prasadam to people, even insects, even our dog or our cat, whoever we come in contact with, then their spiritual life actually begins from that point on. It's an imperceptible beginning of their spiritual life. It's liberation. Why? Because they're receiving, because Krishna, the prasadam is actually non-different from Krishna. It's an incarnation of Krishna. So when they're taking that, they're actually getting a lot of spiritual benefit. And that's why there is this whole aspect of distribution of prasadam, which is spiritual food that can, you know, help people on their path.
And you'll start noticing that you can offer prasadam to anybody. You can have some prasadam lollipops in your car, and somebody on the corner stops you, or a homeless person or whoever, or a friend, you can just give them a prasadam lollipop or anything. So that way we can share this spiritual consciousness with others.
There's so many stories of prasadam, and maybe, you know, endless stories of prasadam. It's just one of those things that, you know, it's the easiest part about bhakti yoga. Let's put it this way, you know. So Divakar, any thoughts from you? Thank you, Delia.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I especially liked the what we spoke about in the beginning on how doing our work and offering it as a sacrifice is in and of itself a yoga. But I was wondering, like, what the kind of minimum bar is, because I mean, the Vedas obviously talk about many complicated sacrifices that one can do, but here it seems like it's implying that just being in a certain mindset is enough. So I was wondering if...
Yeah, I mean, just the mindset and the intention, and even remembering Krishna even a little bit, and especially when we get some results, maybe using some of the results, even a tiny bit in pleasing Krishna or for Krishna's service, then that completes the cycle of gratitude, and that will grow. We start from wherever we are. Krishna has no minimum bar. Krishna is very liberal. So he's not going to set any bar for us. We can decide, we can choose our own bar and say, okay, this is all I can do right now. And that's fine with Krishna. He says, okay, you do this, and then gradually it will grow.
And it starts.
So remembrance, remembrance is something that Krishna cherishes. I mean, that's the whole purpose of spiritual life, is to remember Krishna. So while doing the work, before doing the work, after doing the work, if you can remember Krishna and be grateful to him or thank him or use it in his connection in some way, then that's wonderful. That's turning work into worship.
Yeah, that makes sense. But so are we meant to interpret the more intricate sacrifices as a way of reinforcing that remembrance?
Yeah, ultimately. But what happens is that people get caught up with the rituals itself and they forget the purpose of those rituals, right? So that's where the problem happens. And that's why in this age, it's very simple because we are focusing on the ultimate essence or purpose of all our activities. And that's why in this age, the fire sacrifice are not really recommended. So the sacrifice for this age is the chanting that we are doing together. And that chanting is actually considered to be a very powerful yajna that can purify the whole world.
That's like our yajna for the day. And that's also the most powerful way to transform our work into worship. Finding some time during the day to chant, even for 2 minutes or 1 minute or 5 minutes, whatever one can find. And that it's like the starter, yogurt starter that will turn the whole pot of milk into yogurt. So that's like the starter.
Okay, that makes sense.
Thank you, Divakar. So any other thoughts before we end? Radhika, you had some thoughts? Like we say, we should offer each and everything to Krishna before we eat. Yes, Shweta. So is a ritual of offering in a proper way necessary, or we should keep that consciousness? No, there is a very beautiful ritual. And so we'll share that on Friday, maybe before our discussion and our review. And we'll show you how you can actually, there's a whole, it's a, you can
it's
get
a ritual of love. It's not like a ritual of rigidity. Just like when somebody dear to us comes to our home or our family member, then we put the plates and we decorate it. We'll put everything nicely. We present everything nicely, right? It's out of love. So same thing with Krishna, treating Krishna.
Well, we should then tell the story, that the story about this one boy, his father used to make an offering to Krishna every day, right? So so one time he had to go out of town. So he told his little son, he said, I'm going out, can you make sure that, they had a family deity, that can you please make an offering for him?
Can you offer these laddus? Laddus are like these balls of sweets. So can you offer these laddus to him? So he said, okay, I'll do that. But I don't really know. He said, you just put the food in front of Krishna and pray and ask him to eat it. So that's all you should do. And so the father goes away, and then the son next morning, he puts a plate of those sweets in front of Krishna and he prays that please eat them.
And then nothing happens.
Because it's the deity of Krishna. So
nothing happens. So then he gets really upset. Like he's like, well, then he keeps waiting. And then finally he sees that Krishna is not eating. So then he tells the deity, he's like, what's wrong with you? I know my father is not here. And I know that you're used to getting food from him. But today I'm feeding you. Why can't you eat? And so there's still no response. So finally he gets a stick. And he shows
he starts crying. And he starts crying. And then he gets really upset.
Then he gets a stick. And then he shows the stick. And he says, if you don't eat, I'm going to be really, really mad at you. And so then finally Krishna actually appears and eats the laddus. And so this goes on for 2-3 days. And then finally the father comes home and then he says, oh, where are my laddus? Can I get them? And then the little boy says, well, Krishna ate them. And he's like, no, that's not possible. He's just a deity. He cannot eat. He says, no.
So the father thinks that the son has eaten them and he's lying to him. Krishna has eaten.
So anyway,
and then he says, okay, well, can you show me that Krishna is eating? So, and then the father hides, and then the son goes into the altar, in front of the altar, and then the father can actually see, and the father realizes that actually I have no devotion. My son actually has real devotion to Krishna, and that's why Krishna is accepting those sweets out of his love. And and from that day onwards, the father treats the son as his guru, as his teacher.
So lately I got 2-3 bites into my food and suddenly remember Krishna. I apologize, say a prayer and keep eating. Food offering reminds me of the Day of Death. Yes, when you offer the defunct person their favorite food. Yes. There's also a ritual like that in India where it's called Shraddha, where people actually, make offerings and they offer it to their departed ancestors. So it's described, but the idea is to again offer prasadam. This is they just offer normal food. But the idea is if the ancestors get this prasad, then if they are in some lower species or if they're in some difficult place, then they will be liberated from that. So little esoteric section here today. We'll continue our discussion tomorrow on the third section of the